The tortuous road dropped down like a roller coaster. Came around a power line turn, and there it was, the huge concrete colossus. A wonderful tribute to the ingenuity, the cooperation, the bold, creative daring of man in his struggle to control the forces of nature. I got out of my car here, shook the road kinks out of my legs, and watched the tortoise-like machines circling around. The atmosphere of the dam was awe-inspiring. It kind of took hold of you for a few moments and hushed your thoughts. The desert air felt good, too. It was soft and warm and dry. I closed my eyes for a second, and I could hear the sound of the tires moving over the loose gravel. For a moment in my darkness, I could see the wide eyes of the boys. You know, a strange thought occurred to me. These weren't merely individual cars turning here, but each car seemed to me to belong to a long line. Each car was like a new generation coming up the slope, making their contribution to society and departing. Progress. The word came upon me suddenly. Progress in the American tradition of this great monument to man. Now it was back to Vegas, to the impound, and of course to Ralph De Palma, a really great guy with a genuine love for boys, standing there, bare-chested with the road dust billowing up around him. Boy and the road, both were in his blood. Here we were at the end of the first day's journey, and a wonderful, friendly feeling was in the dust-stirred air of this little impound. Here, too, the boys from the Las Vegas car clubs had come down to play host and to hear all about the youth run. After I got a first-hand report from Jim, the drivers got their briefing. No drinking, no gambling, in the sack by 11, and again, no glass cage. After dinner, they'd be on their own. Well, I've been to a few fancy parties and social events in my time, but I can't ever remember enjoying myself as much as I did having dinner that evening with these boys in the Desert Inn. That evening spoke for itself. It was all there in our faces. After dinner, the boys from the Las Vegas car clubs picked up the boys on the youth run and showed them their town. I felt mighty proud that night. Officer and boy had hit the real jackpot. No violation on the road, no unfortunate incidents at Vegas. And early the next morning, we were off on the run again, against the background splendor of the desert dawn. The sun itself, almost as if it had heard of our youth run, came up beautifully. A huge shadow stretched over the broad plain as we settled down to the long run. This time we were running all the way home with only a quick refueling at Barstow. As I checked the cars on the road, the excitement began to sneak up on me. I knew what it must be doing to the drivers in the run. The nerve tension was a graph. You could read its mounting intensity in the tight-drawn lines of the faces behind the wheels. In the face of Malalka moving through the Joshua trees. In the face of Danny Waskren rolling past the power lines. And in the face of the Pryton's driver, Bob Lewis, running through the sagebrush. In the face of Phil Schiffenbacher, listening to the approaching train. In the face of the cutouts, Gary Simpson, heading for the Barstow Bridge. The Barstow refueling station was practically empty. This time there was no respite here. The boys were in and out again in a matter of minutes, off on the last leg of the two-day run. No rest at Barstow, and now we were running home. And the nerve tension graph that you could read on the faces behind the wheels was running too, and running high. The stress climbing in the face of the Domino's driver, Bill Meacham. In the Clockers driver, Jack Long. And in the face of the Wise Men's Frank Jimenez. Each one sweating out the other right to the finish, where Ralph De Palma was sweating them out too, flagging them home. There wouldn't be any decision as to the winner until the official tabulation sheets were in. And the winner would be announced at a special awards presentation meeting of the Peace Officers Car Club Association later. But the boys in the car clubs were all on hand to welcome home their buddies. You could get an idea of how you did from the number of gallons of gas that you used. So, the tension hung on. The drivers were watching the pumps as though they were scoreboards. The way I figured it, this was one race that no one lost, because we won a better understanding between officer and boy. The run was over. The trophies were presented by the mayor of Linwood and Ralph De Palma. Third place winner, Jerry Maxwell from the Idlers Car Club, City of Bell, 47 ton-miles per gallon. Second place winner, Danny Waskren from the Drag Wagons Car Club, City of Maywood, 51.5 ton-miles per gallon. And the first place winner, Phil Schiffenbacher from the Rod Benders, City of Pasadena, 55 ton-miles per gallon. As Phil took the trophy, I could see his face as I had seen it on the road. And behind that face, the story of the first youth run, the simple story of boy, officer, and road.
Hi there. Did you ever feel it's the little things which somehow throw your life into a tailspin before you realize it? Take one little thing like a high school senior, or to pinpoint it, me, there in the coral sweater, an open-toed expression. Then little thing number 2, Jimmy Cushman, a classmate. Little thing number 3 is that bird brain in the shot rod, giving all us high school kids a bad name. That night, when Jimmy phoned to invite me to a movie, what he didn't know was that my father had seen another little thing in the evening paper, and because of it, told me I couldn't go out nights in any of the kids' cars. And you know what that meant? No dates until he changed his mind. Poor me. But the worst thing was what our school principal was threatening to do. Mr. Potter had announced if he had one more complaint about the kids driving, he'd be forced to do what other schools had done. Lock all cars in the school parking lot till after school every day. Well, we couldn't do anything right away because next day, Dad took me to Sacramento. And while he worked, I did some sightseeing. Still worried about Mr. Potter's warning until suddenly I spotted a sharp-looking sports job with a sign on it, which said something about a safety economy run. Naturally, I didn't know what that was, but I knew what the Flying Red Horse stands for. So, later that afternoon, when I bought a local paper and read that the runs were for high schools, I took off the nearest phone booth, called the oil company, and asked if someone would explain a safety economy run to me. They connected me with Mr. Burton, Ray Burton, up from San Francisco to supervise the run. He said, even though he was about to leave, if I'd come right over, he'd explain it all to me. And was I ever glad I took him up.
Start with, Miss King. We don't put on the runs. You youngsters do it all yourselves. All we do, with a lot of help from 3As and peace officer groups, like the Highway Patrol here in our state, is to show you how to organize a run, then you go ahead and do it.
Oh, but who wins these runs? The driver with the best mileage?
No, although mileage is very important, but these are also safety tests. That's why we donate trophies and the gasoline that's used.
Well, how in the world do you figure the scores?
You get your run organized first. When you're ready, we'll be around to explain it and give you the official observer's report forms. You know, each car carries an adult observer.
With an adult in a car, like a chaperone, it doesn't sound very exciting.
Tell you what, I've got some color movies of runs they've held around the country. If you have the time, I'd love to show them to you.
Well, I've got lots of time.
Good.
I was surprised to see how many schools everywhere had entered past safety economy runs, and how all the faculties pitch in and help. Imagine, just as in the big economy run, all cars are weighed. So, with the ton-mile scoring system, cars of all kinds compete on an equal basis. Now there's a sight, Seattle's floating bridge over Lake Washington. In Portland, a girl walked off with first-place honors. And here at Bakersfield, an engine is being given a last-minute performance check. And not only are the cars weighed, but the passengers are too. Under their scoring system, every last ounce counts. Well, no wonder Bakersfield had all those high-priced cars entered. This country looks richer than Texas. How about that flying red carpet? Bakersfield to Inglewood in 2 seconds flat. And at the end of the run, the time is checked to make certain no car just crawls along to save a few drops of gas. Well, we whiz north again, where you can see how the cars are started at 1-minute intervals. Look at those steaks, supplied by the sponsoring service clubs and served free to all attending the victory luncheon after the run, where they announce the scores and award the trophies. I was sold, and I knew Peninsula High could do the same thing and show our parents, Mr. Potter and the neighbors, that high school kids are good drivers. Mr. Burton invited me to see the Sacramento run next morning. Excitement? Believe me, it was as exciting as a football game. I guess I heard about and saw most everything there. The gasoline and oil are provided by the mobile gas people. And the safety checks, to make sure all cars are in top condition, as well as covered by insurance, are continued until the last car is started. Then, numbered stickers are pasted on, and the cars rolled into the street to line up for the start. At 9 o'clock sharp, the first car is sent off, and the next car is rolled up, in turn, to the starting line. There, the assistant starter tolls off the seconds until the next minute is up. And when they had all left, I went with Mr. Burton to drive around the 96-mile course. It was a real kick for me. But most of all, I couldn't wait to get back to San Francisco to see what I could do about whipping up some enthusiasm for a safety economy run of our own. And Monday, after school, I hauled Jimmy over to our favorite malt shop to get started. Not only did I have Jimmy to try to sell, I had to compete with a jukebox and some music with a beat. Look, how many kids in school have cars? 300?
Well, yeah, I guess so.
Well, then out of that 300, how many got the rest of us into this jam?
Gee, there couldn't be more than 6 or 8 of those yo-yos shoving around shot rods, making like they're real big men, could there?
That's what I mean. So if you were Mr. Potter...
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, if you were, and a lot of our bunch entered the run, and got really good scores, wouldn't you think we're not all goof-offs like Ronnie and Kay and their gang that digs out every time they get into a car?
Well, yeah. But if you can convince your father of that, then I'm with you.
Good. Then let's start making a list of... Uh-oh. Okay, you're vice president of student council. Get to work, because here comes Flash Gordon himself.
Hi, Tay.
Well, what's new and funny, my little bunny?
Tay, listen a minute.
Minute? Man, do you realize in a minute I can go from a standing start to 130 in that little old bomb of mine? Minute.
Tay, we're planning on putting on one of those safety economy runs here at school. Will you and your gang enter if we...
Me? Economy? Of course, you're kidding.
The heck we are. It was you and that lead-foot crowd of yours that got us in all this touch with Mr. Potter.
Sonny boy, I admit I voted for you for council, but when it comes to cars, you better leave it to the men around here. So get lost, Willie. You're acting mighty silly.
Well, what do you do with a character like that?
Beat his brains out if he had any. But after listening to him, I'm sure you're right, Sharon.
Then you'll help get the show on the road?
It'll help cut down that squeak. Send me in, Coach. Hey, Sharon, I got a whole committee.
Oh, sure. After twisting my arm.
And my wrist. Not me. I just came along because I think boys are fun. This is a run for automobiles, not boys, you know. Who's running? I just take my trusty shotgun and bang. But if I ever hit one, the game warden usually makes me throw him back in because he's too young. Okay, cut the clowning. Ladies and gentlemen, the meeting of the board of directors is called to order. With Jimmy only reluctantly agreeing to help, the work began. First, to Auto Shop to see the instructor, Mr. McCutcheon, and ask if he'd head up the faculty end. He said he would if Mr. Potter agreed. Mr. Potter? He was the principal who was threatening to lock up all the kids' cars. Well, seeing we needed some assistance, we called Mr. Burton, who had returned to his San Francisco office, and he agreed to talk to our principal. After all the trouble Mr. Potter had had because of the few kids like Tay, who make a racetrack of the streets, it's no wonder he didn't take to the request at first. But after Mr. Burton gave him a few facts and figures, he said okay, and gave us permission for Mr. Burton, highway patrol officers, and me to address an assembly. Can me, a big shot, a public speaker yet. Next day, to get sign-ups, I guess Jimmy and I answered almost every kind of question. Like, a run is usually over a course of about 100 miles, which we'll lay out with the 3As and the highway patrol. That any student with a valid driver's license may enter, driving any standard type of car. And that to make it a test of good driving habits, observers go along and give penalties of 1/10 of a gallon for each infraction of a traffic law, if any. Jimmy and I did fine. 24 kids signed up the first day, and we were real proud as we went to the malt shop to meet Mr. Burton. He thought we'd done a bang-up job. In fact, he teased us. Maybe he'd give us a job, selling gas and oil, door to door. Big joke. But then, when he heard we hadn't gotten any other schools in, he warned us that in a city this size, with only one school entered, the run could be a flop. Having seen our sad, sack faces, next day Mr. Burton was waiting for us in front of school. He had news for us. The company had agreed to award another trophy to help get other schools in. A sweepstakes trophy to be awarded to the school getting the best teen score. Were we ever thrilled? With the old school spirit working for us, it would be a cinch. Next day, we told Mr. McCutcheon our good news, but found he'd already gotten 4 other schools to enter. And then he told us we were the ones who'd have to make talks to the service clubs to ask if they would provide the observers we'd need and the victory luncheon. Jimmy threw in the sponge, and I threw the book at James. If Mr. McCutcheon hadn't calmed us down, Jimmy and I still wouldn't be talking. But then we got more help from Mr. Burton. He went to the 3As, saw Mr. Moore, and they agreed they'd both help us get speaking dates, which they did. We both went over like a house afire, until I called on the chairman of another club to ask if I could address his next meeting. And, well, that's just about it, Mr. Scott. So, if you'll put me on as a speaker at your next luncheon meeting, I promise I'll tell all about the run in 3 minutes flat.
No, I'm sorry, Miss King. Our club isn't interested in races or competitions of any kind where youngsters your age risk their necks in cars.
But it's not a race, it's...
You did say that the cars had to be back in a specified time, didn't you?
Well, naturally. Otherwise, you'd crawl along.
Exactly. Young lady, you're just wasting your time. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking about using my influence to see that your entire project is canceled.
That's your privilege, Mr. Scott. But I've been driving for 2 years now, and I've never had a tip, not even for parking. And not one of my fenders has a scratch on it. May I ask what your record has been for the past 2 years?
Well, that's really not here nor there, and rather than appear obdurate about it, the meeting's at noon tomorrow in the Pine Room.
Okay, Sharon, shoot.
Now, check the cafeteria to make sure all the arrangements are complete for the victory luncheon.
Okay, I'll take care of that.
And he says we have to send out at least twice as many press releases as we did before.
Check. What else?
I don't know who'll do this. Try to get interviewed on TV.
Well, that's your job, Maureen. You got what it takes for that kind of stuff.
Oh, no, you don't. What are you trying to do, bring radio back again?
Oh, cut it out. You're a real movie star.
Oh, here's one more thing we all can do. Mr. Burton says to try to get lists from all the service clubs with names and phone numbers of every man who's volunteered to be an official and observer.
Well, okay, but I don't get it.
To call them up Friday and remind them we expect them out Saturday morning. Mr. Burton says if it's a nice warm day, some might just happen to recall a previous golf day.
Well, 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 if it isn't the Indianapolis Race Committee as I live and breathe.
Well, okay, Mr. Hotshot. If you're such an 8-cylinder wizard, why isn't your entry in here?
Are you kidding? Get up at the crack of dawn and play some silly baby game? Count me out, little sprout.
What is it with you, Tay? Chicken? Afraid some of us will show you up?
Show me up? That'd be the day.
It'd be the day I'd like to see.
And you know what, Tay? I bet even I can beat you.
Put your money where your mouth is.
You are chicken, aren't you?
Don't be silly, Lily. I wouldn't race against a girl.
And don't be stupid, Rupert. It's not a race, it's competition. And besides, I'm not even sure that shot rod of yours could pass a safety check.
Shot rod? Okay, you asked for it. What's the bet? And I'll even give you odds.
That won't be necessary. Tell you what, whoever loses takes the rest of us to the movie Saturday night.
And how will we get to the show, or has your father become big-hearted and changed his mind?
I didn't mean to the drive-in. We can all go down to the park side. I want to see what they're playing anyhow. Well, Tay, is it a bet or is it a bet?
Oh, okay, but you wait and see. I'll cream the whole bunch of you.
Just sign here, milkman, and we'll see if it'll be cream or just a large dose of skim milk. Safety checks start tomorrow. We were getting closer, and the auto shop volunteer crews work like maniacs checking cars. Maniacs is right, too. For who else would have passed Tay's car as being safe? I guess they checked the car, not the driver. But where there were boys, there was Sally, clowning as usual and doing anything to make Tay realize she was alive. Tay didn't think it was funny. And Mike, with his father's brand new hardtop, he didn't think it was funny either when they told him the car couldn't be okayed because the front wheels were out of line. Poor Mike, having to tell his dad 2 high school kids had rejected his shiny new car as unsafe. His father took to the notion like a duck to a load of buckshot. Next morning, school had hardly opened when Mike's father was there, chewing out Mr. McCutcheon as if it had been his fault. But Mr. McCutcheon explained that's what auto shop and driver ed courses are for. Mike's father went for that in a big way. He told Mr. McCutcheon he would have his wheels aligned and let Mike enter. But it wasn't all work at school. Maureen, for instance, went out with the run supervisors for a final check on the course they had laid out. And what a course! 100 miles through city, freeways, country, and, this being San Francisco, of course, across the Golden Gate Bridge into Marin County. It was all so beautiful, we prayed it wouldn't rain the day of the run. Little did we know, poor innocents. Now the whole school helped. Journalism classes wrote all publicity we needed. Art classes designed the posters. And the print shop turned itself inside out doing the car placards. I even typed dozens of envelopes to the local newspapers. And Maureen was interviewed on TV, as Jimmy was on radio. The last big chore was weighing in the cars that were entered, because the weight of the cars and the occupants is used in figuring the final score. Saturday morning, the day of the run, I was out of the house